The Lord be with you. A reading from the Gospel of Mary. So before I begin today, I want to just remind us that today is the third Sunday of the month. So as usual, there'll be an extended homily and opportunity for questions, answers, discussions at the end of the homily. So listen to the reading. When the Blessed One had said this, he greeted them all. "Peace be with you," he said. "Acquire my peace within yourselves. Be on your guard so that nobody deceives you by saying, 'Look over here,' or 'Look over there.' For the seed of the true humanity exists within you. Follow it. Those who search for it will find it. Go then, preach the good news of the kingdom. Do not lay down any rule beyond what I've ordained for you, nor promulgate law like the lawgivers, or else these laws will dominate you." After he had said these things, he left them. And they were distressed and wept greatly. "How are we going to go out to the rest of the world to preach the good news about the kingdom of true humanity?" they said. "If they didn't spare him, how will they spare us?" Then Mary stood up. She greeted them all and addressed her brothers. "Do not weep and be distressed, nor let your hearts be irresolute, for his grace shall be with you and will shelter you. Rather, we should praise his greatness, for he has joined us together and made us true human beings." When Mary said these things, she turned their minds towards the good news, and they began to ask about the words that the Savior had spoken to her. A gospel inspired by God. G. Harry Stein was born in 1928 and died in 1997. He started out as a scientist and wound up as an engineer. So his basic degree was in physics. He was born in Colorado Springs in Colorado, 1928. Did his bachelor's degree in physics and then went working for the White Sands Proving Ground, this great facility in New Mexico, this great engineering science facility. And his specialty was rocketry. And he did a lot of work over 30 years in rocketry and wrote a lot of books and wrote principally on scientific and technological matters, but he also wrote science fiction. But one of the books he wrote, Josh sent to me about 2 weeks ago. And it's a book that's called Mind Machines That You Can Make. And it's an interesting how-to book, how to make 8 different machines you can make. And the interesting thing about these machines is they work, but science has no idea how they work. In fact, science says they can't work. It's like the bumblebee. The bumblebee can't fly according to aviation law. But the good news is that bumblebees don't read aviation journals, so they fly anyway. But they're not supposed to fly. So none of these machines are supposed to work. Science says they can't work, but they do. So I'll give you a simple little example. There's been an ancient theory that pyramids are a very special shape and that they have very interesting kinds of properties. So this guy created a pyramid. He's working on the work of others beforehand, so he's just making literally a cardboard pyramid, tetrahedron, 4-sided with a base, with a hole on the side. And he's heard that pyramids have the ability to keep steel really, really sharp. If you put steel inside pyramids, they stay sharp. So he figures out, I'm going to test this. So he bought 6 razor blades, Gillette's, just the ordinary one go. You use it one day and it's blunt. You can't use it a second day. If you do it, it'll cut the face off you. And so he buys 6 of these, and he designates one as the experimental blade and the other as the control blades. And in the morning he gets up and he lathers his face, and he's designated the experimental one. He'll shave one side of his face with the experimental one, and shave the other with one of the other razors, and then wash it through them carefully, put the control blade back into the cupboard, and the other one he puts inside the pyramid. And then next morning he gets up, going to shave himself again, so he uses the experimental one on the other side of his face, and one of the other ones on this side of the face. And over the course of a few days, he figures out, if he tries to use the ordinary ones 3 times, he's going to cut himself. They're totally blunt, and he's cutting the face off himself. The blade that he puts inside the pyramid lasted for 24 shaves before it got blunt. So these are the kinds of things he said. He gives you how to, it's a manual. He shows you from very, very simple materials how to construct these and says, test them and see if they work. Science says they can't work, but they do anyway. And so his idea is build it, test it. If it works, try to figure out how it works so you can add something to science. You can help science move along and figure out how things work that they say shouldn't work and can't work but do anyway. So that's meant to be the scientific, the essence of science. You take something from the natural world, something you observe, and you set up some kind of an experimental design to test it, and then if it works, then you've got some kind of a scientific principle. That's the theory at least. Science doesn't always work like that. Max Planck said very, very famously, Max Planck was a very famous German scientist who won a Nobel Prize for Science way back at the beginning of the 1900s. He said famously one time, science changes one funeral at a time. So ideas die very slowly. So until the old scientists die off, they're clinging tenaciously to how they believe science works. And it's only when they die and the young guys come that science moves forward like this. And I want to talk about this today. I'm going to make 3 main points this morning. The first one, I'm going to talk about moving from experience to law making. Secondly, I'm going to talk about the Gospel of Mary that we just read. And then I'm going to pick up on this very strange phrase, the true humanity, or the Son of Man. What does this phrase mean, the true humanity? So the first one, going from experience to law making. Now, if the essence of science is that you start off with an experiment and you wind up with a scientific fact, then that should be the journey of spirituality as well. Spirituality should start out with an experience and it should wind up with a truth. So just like the scientist is going to do an experiment, and if the experiment works and it's replicated in somebody else's laboratory, it's done 2 or 3 times, then you've got a scientific principle. That's how spirituality should work as well. It should start with experiences, and the experiences should lead us into truth. But inevitably, churches and religions try to substitute dogma and belief systems for experiences. So it's very interesting that twice in the Gospel, according to Mary today, on 2 occasions in this Gospel, Jesus says it first, and then Levi says it at the very end of the Gospel. We didn't read that passage today. Jesus says to them, do not lay down rules or promulgate laws, because if you lay down rules and promulgate laws, they will dominate you. And he's absolutely right. But religion does it anyway. So the good news is meant to be an invitation into personal mystical experiences. That's what the preaching of the good news should be. If somebody is preaching good news, they should be inviting us into our own personal experiences of the mystical. And that movement from the experience of the mystical should lead us into transformative truth. But churches inevitably try to impose rules and regulations and dogma and belief system. And already at the very, very beginning, they're trying to do it. And actually at the end of the Gospel of Mary, in chapter 10 of our Gospel, at the very, very end, Matthew says the very same thing that Jesus had said at the beginning. He says, we shouldn't be laying down rules and regulations, otherwise they will dominate us. We should be preaching the good news. But even at the very, very beginning, there's the tendency to substitute belief systems and dogma for mystical experiences. And so, for instance, in 325, the first council of the church was called not by the bishops of the church, but by the emperor of the Roman Empire, Constantine. Constantine had just legalized Christianity. The Roman empire at the time was crumbling under the Goths and the Visigoths and the Huns and the Vandals coming down, the Celtic tribes coming down from Germany and Belgium and strange places like that. And Rome was crumbling. So Constantine needed some organizing, solidifying force that would hold his empire together. And he figured out Christianity had survived 300 years of persecution and it was thriving, so this was the group to do it. So he called the bishops into the first council and he gave them a mandate. He said, you're not allowed to leave this conclave until you come up with a formulation, a creedal formulation that all Christians can get behind. I don't want any divisiveness in my kingdom. I want everybody believing the same stuff. And they sat in council and they came up with the Nicene Creed. I believe in God, the Father Almighty, Creator, and that stuff that you learned as a kid. And he made that the core of his empire. So already the movement is in place to substitute law and ritual and dogma and belief systems for the raw experience itself. And so the pressure is on us constantly to move away from our own mystical experiences of God into the laws and regulations and rules and dogmas and belief system that the churches of various kinds are laying down for us. And so the pressure is on us constantly, because we all start off life as little kids filled with curiosity and filled with awe. We're having mystical experiences all the time. But then they educate this stuff out of us, and we get inducted into the cultural trance. So we go from the experiences to the dogma and the ritual. And the truth is that eventually, at some stage, we don't see things as they are. We simply see things as we have become. We see things as we are. So there was a very interesting collaboration done a few years ago between computer scientists, cognitive psychologists, and neuroanatomists, looking at how images are formed on the occipital lobe of the brain. So this is the part of the brain that we form images, visual images in. And what they found out was that upwards of 50% of the images that actually appear on the occipital lobe are generated inside the mind itself, generated inside the brain. They're not coming from outside at all. It's not that the occipital lobe is recording stuff that the eyes are seeing outside the system. They're seeing 50% of what they're seeing is stuff that has been made up inside in the mind. And it's made up because of our belief systems and our fears and our prejudices and stuff like this. So 50% of what we think is reality, visual reality, is being constructed inside the mind. So we do not see things as they are. We see things as we are. There was another very cruel experiment done in Princeton University about 25 years ago, where they took newborn kittens and they divided them into two groups. They took them away from their mothers and they raised them in big black boxes, where the interior of the box is just painted black. And so there's no visual stimulation. They're being fed in there, but in one box there are horizontal white stripes painted every 6 inches inside in the box. And in the other box there are vertical white stripes painted every 6 inches. And these kittens are raised inside in those environments for 6 months. They see nothing else except the interior of that particular kind of box. And the guys who are raised inside where there are vertical white lines painted, when they're let out finally at the age of 6 months, they can process vertical reality. So they're not going to walk into the legs of chairs, but they can see horizontal surfaces. They couldn't jump up onto a sofa, for instance. They can't register it, because they're seeing not what is, but what they have become because of their environment. The other little kittens who've been raised in this box, where there were horizontal white lines painted, but that was all, when they're left out, they can't process vertical reality. They're walking straight into the legs of chairs and tables. They literally cannot process vertical reality, because during the period when the visual cortex is developing, they weren't given any kind of stimulation for that area. So we don't see things as they are. We see things as we are, as a result of the culture. Little kids see stuff as things are. Little kids know when the emperor is naked, when the emperor has no clothes, and they'll say that. But then we educate them out of it, and then finally they begin to see the clothes that the emperor actually doesn't have. And so the culture teaches us and educates us to see things not as things are, but as we are. And the great religious teachers again and again and again will inveigh against this. They will say stuff like the Buddha will say, be a lamp unto yourself. Buddhism will say, if you meet the Buddha on the road, kill him. Meister Eckhart will say, I pray daily to God to rid me of God. In other words, you can't be setting up systems and believing that these are actually how God is. God is an ineffable truth. And in order to see this ineffable truth, we have to see things as they really are rather than as we are. So we have to kind of grow into that realization ourselves. Which brings me to my second point. I want to talk then about Mary's gospel and what she has to say about this phenomenon. Now, the Gospel of Mary was discovered in 1896 in Egypt. It was found actually with 3 or 4 other famous writings. The Apocryphon of John was found at the same time, and the Acts of Peter was found at the same time, and the Sophia of Jesus was found at the same time. 4 documents found in a particular cache of material. And the papyri in which they were written dated back to about the 5th century. But the documents themselves are much, much older. They're written in a language called Coptic, which is an Egyptian language that has a Greek alphabet. And so they're written in that language. And they may go back to 50 or 60 AD. Latest date is maybe 150 AD. So they're from a very, very early period. And the Gospel of Mary particularly, there's a bunch of stuff missing from the first 6 pages of the document are missing. And there's a hole in the middle of it. There are 4 pages missing in the middle of it. And so when we started reading today, we're reading at about page 7. So there's a whole bunch of stuff missing in it. But it's the Gospel according to Mary of Magdala. And Mary obviously is a core character in the early church before she's kind of rubbed out of the picture. So we know, for instance, even in the canonical Gospels, Mary is mentioned in Luke's Gospel as being one of the women who followed Jesus around constantly and attended to him. In Matthew's Gospel, Mary is mentioned as somebody who was present during the crucifixion of Jesus. She's one of the women present at the crucifixion. In John's Gospel, she's the first one to whom Jesus appears after his resurrection. And in the Gospel of Philip, the Gnostic Gospel of Philip, we are told that Mary was the companion of the Lord. In fact, we are told, Philip says, there were 3 who always walked constantly with the Lord. And it's not Matthew, it's not Peter, James, and John. He says there were the 3 Marys. Each of them was called Mary. There was Mary, his mother. There was Mary, his sister. And there was Mary, his companion. And so in the Gospel of Philip, Mary is given this pride of place. Also in the Gospel of Thomas. And today, in the Gospel of Mary, we see her primary importance. So the story starts off with a post-resurrection appearance of Jesus. Jesus appears to the disciples, and they're in dialogue with him, and they're asking him questions. And he answers their questions, and the final injunction he gives them is, do not lay down any rules apart from what I've told you. The only rule I've given you is the rule of love. You must love others as I have loved you. Don't lay down any other rules apart from this. And don't lay down any laws apart from this. Otherwise, if you lay down laws and rules, these laws and rules will dominate you. That was the very last thing Jesus said to them, according to Mary's Gospel. But now they're distraught. He's gone, and they have no idea what they're going to do. And they begin thinking, if we start preaching in his name, look what they did to him. If they did that to him, what are they going to do to us? So they're totally confused and distraught. And finally, they say to Mary, can you tell us something? We know that you were closer to the Lord than anybody else. Did he reveal any secret stuff to you that you want to tell us about? And so Mary takes the plunge and says, he did. And what was it? And she begins telling them. Over the next 3 or 4 chapters, she begins telling him. And then the story, we didn't hear it today, it's the next chapter and the chapter after that. They get really mad with her. So Peter, who has invited her, he said to her, we know that he loved you more than anybody else. Tell us, did he reveal any secret teachings to you? And she said, actually he did. And Peter says, tell us what he said. And then she goes on and tells him, and they get really, really mad with her. When she's finished telling them, Andrew, Peter's brother, says, I don't believe this. This is totally different from what I heard him saying. This can't be true. That's rubbish. I don't believe it. And Peter got really, really mad with her, and he says, do you want us to really believe that he told you stuff, and you're only a woman, that he didn't tell us, and we're his disciples? And then Levi steps in. Levi is another name from Matthew, at the very end of the Gospel. And Matthew says to Peter, Peter, you've always been a hothead. You're always flying off the handle, and you're doing it right now. You know, we know that she was closer to him than anybody else, and it seems to me that what she's saying has the ring of truth in it. So I'm going off to preach the good news. And the last statement, as Matthew is going off, he says, and remember, don't lay down any rules and any new laws, just preach the good news. And we were told, and then Matthew went off, and he started preaching the good news. Now, unfortunately, the churches haven't continued to do this, because we've constantly traded and substituted dogma and belief systems for the raw experience and for the good news itself. So good news should be good, and it should be new. Unfortunately, it's tended to become just old hat. Instead of good news, it's old hat. And it's law, and it's dogma, and it's regulation, and it's precept. So you know you're in the presence of good news when you read something or you come across something that makes your heart sing. Then you know that this is good news here. If you come across something that tells you you must do X or you must avoid Y, you're not in the presence of good news anymore. You're merely in the presence of law and dogma. And we've multiplied laws and multiplied dogma in the churches and outside of the churches. There are over 8 million pieces of legal legislation in our world today. And ignorance of any of them is no excuse. If you travel anywhere and you break a law, the fact that you don't know the law exists doesn't exculpate you from punishment. There are over 8 million different pieces of legislation throughout our world today, inside and outside the church. There are 2 million Americans incarcerated at the moment. It's getting easier and easier to be a lawbreaker in our world. So we multiply laws instead of multiplying the opportunities for creativity and experience. It's been my experience that there's a negative correlation between, on the one hand, creativity and mystical experiences, and on the other hand, between dogma and law. The more law increases, the more creativity and mysticism goes on. They're negatively correlated with each other. And it's fascinating to me, and it's upsetting to me to watch what we do with little children. That we take these children who are born as mystics, whose eyes are drinking in the extraordinary experiences of being incarnated, and we turn them merely into automatons who are rote learning, and we force them to colour between the lines. When you start colouring between the lines, you stop being a mystic. The mystic is the one who has the courage to be able to paint outside the lines. So that, for me, is the invitation of Mary's Gospel today. To colour outside the lines, to let go of the regulations and the laws, and to aim for the creativity and the mystical experiences. Which brings me to my third point then. This extraordinary phrase, the true human being, or the Son of Man. The translation given in the uncommon text calls it the true human being. The more common one is the Son of Man. When Jesus talks about the Son of Man, again, this has been misunderstood constantly. Throughout the canonical Gospels, when Jesus says the Son of Man was sent, we've translated this always as the Son of Man means the only Son of God. Jesus being very obvious, he's not talking about the Son of God, and he's certainly not talking about the only Son of God. He's talking about the true human being, what it means to be an incarnated human being. When we truly understand what it means to be an incarnated being, then this phrase is understood for the first time. Every time Jesus speaks of himself as the Son of Man, he's talking about the humanity, which is the vessel that holds the divinity for all of us. It's not that Jesus is in a special category of one, that he's God's only begotten Son. He is not God's only begotten Son. Everything that's begotten of God is equally divine. There is nothing which is not a word of God made flesh. Jesus is one example. The difference between Jesus and the rest of us is that Jesus recognizes that. He is a self-realized avatar. He looks into the core of his own being and he sees God. And the idea of following an avatar or being inspired by an avatar is not that because the avatar looks inside and sees God, then we must look at the avatar and see that the avatar is God. That's not the object of an avatar. The object of an avatar is not to have us look at him and say, oh, there's a Son of God. We recognize God inside that person. The function of an avatar is that when we look at them, we see an exemplar of somebody who recognized their own divinity so that we in turn can recognize our divinity. The function of an avatar is to be an exemplar of a self-realized being so that we too become self-realized being. And this is the object of the exercise, to be able to look into ourselves and see that we are divine. But we have to look beyond the ego, obviously, to make that statement. If I look at my ego and say I'm divine, I'm simply a narcissist. If I look beyond the ego and realize that I'm divine, then I'm part of God's manifestation. And kids do this, again, naturally. Kids naturally look inside and they see that they're from source and that they're from God. So I would advocate a little practice. I've started doing myself about the last year. There are two ways of coming out of a dream state. When you're dreaming at night, there are two ways out of a dream state. You can go up or you can go down. If you go up from a dream state, you're going into deep dreamless sleep. If you come down out of a dream sleep, you're coming back into waking consciousness. Now, when you go up into a deep dreamless sleep, you're actually merging at that stage with your own cosmic body. You're merging with your causal body, you're merging with your Christ-conscious body, whatever word you want to give to it. When you're in deep dreamless sleep, you're in a place which is beyond mere contents of consciousness into the true consciousness of light and of spirit itself. So if you can train yourself to move in that direction consciously, then you're literally moving up into your cosmic self. And if you can train yourself to wake down, to come down the other direction, and realize that this is your mission body. This is not your true identity, this is your mission body. But that you can consciously wake down into your mission body to face incarnation, then you've understood what Christ consciousness is about. So it's a little prayer I make at the very, very end of the day. Before I sleep, I say, I am now going to extinguish my ego. I'm going to travel in the astral realms, visiting with light beings and assisting sentient beings who are in distress. I want to wake up to my cosmic body, and I want to wake down to my mission body. Now, there's a big difference between waking down and dumbing down. Waking down to my mission body is the realization that this is a spacesuit that I have been given for the purposes of mission and for incarnation. That's waking down to my mission body. If I dumb down instead of waking down, I think that this is who I am. I look at my physical self, or my emotional being, or my ideas, and I think that that is who I am. I'm not waking down then, I'm simply dumbing down. And society in the cultural trance is constantly inviting us to dumb down, to kind of wake up from the dream state and dumb down into this realization that we're basically consumers. We've been created to be consumers. Consumers of propaganda and consumers of stuff. And so the invitation into Christ consciousness, the phrase, the true Son of Man, or the true human being, is the person who can move in both directions, who can move out of a dream state into Christ consciousness, where there are no contents to consciousness, or wake down when the alarm clock goes off into your mission body and realize that this literally is a spacesuit you've taken on in order to accomplish a mission on planet Earth. So I'll open it up to question and answer discussion at this stage. Patricia. Sure, just one take, and we get a microphone for you.
About the dreaming, the levels you're talking about. If you have a dream that just seems like for instance, I had a dream the other night. It just seemed like my life, only there was something going on.
Okay.
So is the level of dreaming like something different, or is it just how you interpret what you dream?
Okay, that's brilliant. So there are actually many, many different kinds of dreaming. Carl Jung talked about 4 different kinds of dreaming. So there are dreams which are simply the rehashing of the day's experiences. So the psyche is trying to kind of process just the ordinary events of the day. That's kind of just ordinary dreaming. There's a second level of dreaming that he called dreaming at the level of the personal unconscious. So these are important issues in your life, not just kind of mundane daily activities that you're trying to process, but they're important issues in your life that you're trying to make sense of, and you're getting the unconscious perspective on it. There's a second kind of dreaming. A third kind of dreaming he talked about are dreams that are coming from the collective unconscious. So we share archetypal material with all other human beings. In the journey of the evolution of humans over a 3.7 billion year period, there have been some key experiences that have informed what it means to be a human being. And sometimes we tap into these experiences. These are the big, big dreams. Maybe we'll have 5 or 6 of these in a lifetime. But these are the dreams you'll point back to and say, I had this great dream one time, and then you begin to see what it is. These are major dreams that may have impact not just for yourself, but for others. In fact, the part of the duty of the shaman for the tribe was to dream on behalf of the tribe. So it's the third kind of dream. And the fourth kind of dream he called special dreams. They're dreams that are somehow precognitive, or they're psychodiagnostic, or they're physiodiagnostic, that there are dreams you'll have which will talk about your actual state of health, that you'll actually get information in dreams about the state of your health or the state of your mental health. So that's a fourth level of dreams. Now the dreams are coming from an area of us, the unconscious. The unconscious is a computer, it's a mainframe computer operating at the rate of 40 million bits a second. Consciousness operates at the rate of 40 bits a second. So the unconscious is a computer which is literally 1 million times more powerful than consciousness. So it's an alternative viewpoint, to the conscious viewpoint. It's not that it's more important or less important, it's that it gives us a different perspective. So an image that Carl Jung also used was the relationship of the consciousness to unconscious is the relationship of a rider to a horse. If you're a rider on a horse and you're trying to go for a jump, the horse provides the power of the system. You're not going to be able to jump over a 7-foot gate on your own. The horse can. But the horse won't do it unless you're on it. You're not trying to, horse left to its own devices, why would it want to jump a 7-foot gate? But if you're a rider and you're pointing at it, you can make him jump it. So the unconscious provides the power to the system, and consciousness provides a direction to the system. An example I use, or a metaphor I use, is that of a submarine and its periscope. When a submarine comes up near the surface and it sends its periscope up and it's looking around, to see is it safe up there, or what's above the water. You know, there's no power in the periscope, but has a perception, has a viewpoint that you can't have down from under here. Now, if the periscope believes that it has the power of the submarine, it's fooling itself. The power is in the body that's under the water. But the perception, the viewpoint from above the water is very, very important. It's a complementary viewpoint. So that's how dreams operate. In fact, every state of consciousness is a periscope that moves into a different dimension of reality. And so we need to have models of reality that allow us to move into many, many different states of consciousness. And dreams are one that happen very, very naturally to us. And so dreams are really bringing us into other states of consciousness. And then, of course, how are we going to unpack them? So how we interpret them is going to determine the effect that they will have on us. But they're literally putting us in contact with other levels of reality. I think often they're putting us in contact with parallel universes, because I'm a big believer that when nature is faced with a choice between A and B, a significant choice between A and B, it chooses both. It spins off parallel universes in which we act out the consequences of having chosen A and the consequences of having chosen B. And I believe that in dream state, sometimes these parallel universes interweave and intersect with each other again, and that we're doing like parallel processing, that we're speeding up our evolution in our dream time by delving into other lifetimes or other parallel universes in which we're also having experiences. So there's the reality of the dreaming itself, and there's the interpretation that the way we unpack them will determine the effect they're going to have on us. Great.
I have one more question. When Jesus was talking to his disciples about being the Son of Man or the realized human being, did he have to explain that to them, what it meant? And if he did, how does he do it in the Gospels and in the readings?
Okay, great. It's a great question. So when Jesus uses the phrase "the Son of Man" or "the true Son of Man," did he have to explain this to people, or what happens? I'm a big believer that any one of these great avatars that have come among us, that they're coming into a situation of a very, very mixed reception. There are going to be people right across the spectrum of spiritual development listening to these people. And they're going to have to pitch their message in such a way that they're going to engage everybody at the level they're at. So I think this is the main reason why Jesus specifically did not speak in psychological terminology or philosophical parlance or technical scientific language. He spoke in stories, because when you hear a story, every one of us has the ability to unpack a story according to the level of our own development. If you speak in specifics, then people who don't understand the specifics are lost. If people don't have technical acumen in a particular area and you speak in technical jargon, you've lost everybody. If you speak in stories, everybody is going to get something out of it, but they'll get very, very different things out of it. And so when you look at, the example of Jesus' own life, Jesus is speaking to a very big audience. Some of the audience thought he was mad. Some of the audience thought he was a blasphemer. Some of the audience thought that he was a rabble-rouser. Some of them thought he was an entertainer. And some of them realized who he really was. Maybe John and Mary of Magdala, maybe his mother. So his audience are going to unpack the message in very, very different ways. So I believe that when he uses phrases like this, he's watching his audience very, very carefully. And he's looking at who's having what kind of a reaction. And then he's going to pick out some special people who are ready for the next stage of the journey, and he's going to begin talking to them at different kinds of levels. And so I believe that that's the reason he had, of all the crowds who followed him, there were 72 special. And for the 72 special, there were 12 who were special. And of the 12 who were special, there were 3 who were special. And of the 3 who were special, there was 1 who was special. And so he's looking at them and grokking at what level they're getting the message. And then he's relating to them at deeper and deeper levels as they do. So I think, for instance, Mary of Magdala, maybe his own mother, maybe John the Beloved, maybe these were real mystics who were getting him at a very, very evolved level. And then he would take those aside. There was a story in Thomas's Gospel a few weeks back, if you remember, where Christ says to everybody, he says, "Who do people say that I am?" And they say, "Well, some people think you're John the Baptist, come back to life. Some people think you're Elijah. Some people think you're one of the Old Testament prophets." And then Jesus says, "What about you guys? You've been with me now for 3 years. Who do you think that I am?" And Matthew says, "You are a wise angel." And Peter says, "You are a sage, a great sage." And he says to Thomas, "What about you, Thomas?" And Thomas says, "My Lord, my lips cannot say who you are. And Jesus says, Thomas, come here quick. And he brings him aside. And then he tells something to Thomas. And Thomas comes back, and the crowd said to Thomas, what did he tell you? And Thomas says, I can't say. I mean, what do you mean I can't say? If I told you what he said, you'd take up stones and throw and kill me. So what did he say to Thomas? Thomas obviously had reached a level that Jesus was able to tell him stuff that he couldn't tell to the others. And this is the experience of Mary today. Mary took a chance. They said to her, tell us something he told you that he didn't tell the rest of us. And Mary's thinking, can I trust him? Can I really go for it? And she decides to do it. And she tells him a bunch of stuff, and the result is they verbally stoned her. You know, Andrew's getting really upset with her, Peter's getting really upset, and finally Matthew comes in and intervenes. And so he's going to speak to different people depending on the level that they've reached. And this is why he'll speak in parables, and then watch his audience, and then pick out the special ones and say, okay, I think you're ready for the next level of transmission. Here it is. And so phrases like this, I think he's using like as a fishing pole, figuring out who's going to bite, and when we bite, let's draw aside a little bit, and let's go a little bit deeper here. And it's the same thing in our world right now. The vast bulk of us, we hear the Christian message, and we'll respond to it as fundamentalists. We think this is actually a literal interpretation, and that Jesus Christ is the way, the truth, the life. There's no salvation outside of Jesus. That me or you, there's no salvation outside of Jesus. That's the fundamentalists taking it. You've got all the ways from that right across to the mystics of our times that realize that Jesus Christ is one among many avatars, and that the avatars themselves are not special, only in the sense that they realize that everything that exists is God. We're as much God as they are. I wrote a little piece for the newsletter. There's a newsletter goes up on my website now once a month, courtesy of Stefan. And the one I put up just a few days ago was an experience I had just last week up in the countryside. As I have a little pilgrimage route that I traverse every day. It's about 1/3 of a mile. And there are different kinds of statuary. I have a Buddha head there. I have a Krishna figure there. I have a Madonna and child there. And when the rain stopped a few weeks ago, there was this extraordinary profusion of insects came out, literally by their tens of thousands. And I have a little Buddha head, and I have it up on top of a piece of redwood. It's just the head of the Buddha, and his head is all kind of curly. And there's a story at one stage that when he was meditating in the sun, it was really, really hot, and a whole bunch of slimy slugs climbed onto his head, out of compassion to cool him down, because he had a bald pate. And so there's thousands of slugs crawled up into his head, and his entire head is covered with them. And you see many of the carvings of the Buddha will have all these little dots on his head. There are slugs on top of his head to keep him cool out of compassion. But 2 weeks ago, as I was walking up there, I came across the Buddha head, and there was another thing up. There was a little blue-bellied lizard right up on top of the crown chakra, literally on top of the crown chakra. And I began to ask myself, wow, is this just, a little lizard sunning himself? Or is this a lizard who is trying to attain Buddha nature or Christ consciousness? He's right in the stream between source, and this is called, the crown chakra is called Sahasrara, right up here. He's right in the line of the induction from source to here. So was I looking at the first enlightened lizard on planet Earth? And then I moved on. The final place I stop at is an old oak tree, and there's a Madonna and child, a carved wooden Madonna and child that hangs off it. And as I approached it, she's carrying the infant Jesus on this hand, and coming down the other arm was a millipede. And the millipede was walking down here, and every so often he could lift himself up and look around and then go back down and climb again. And I suddenly got the idea, here is Mary, the feminine face of God, carrying two of her children. And she loves both of them equally. And that was the important word. She loves both of them equally. She loves the millipede no less than she loves her little infant. Because for God, everything that exists is an object of total, unconditional, unlimited love. And that's what the avatars get. The avatars get that everything is equally beloved of God. And so when Jesus is using these key phrases, he's inviting us into the next step, the one for which we're now ready next. And he's watching our eyes, and he's watching the responses. And he's using these stories and these kinds of phrases to say, okay, who's getting it, at what level, and now, okay, you're ready for an extra piece of teaching.
So it's not unlike the dream state.
It's exactly like the dream.
Which you can understand it, and some people can do it
Right.
at the very, very highest level.
Yes.
But it's like the experience you're having. It's an experience, and it's just what you take to it and what you take from it.
Totally. Absolutely. And so you're going to see things as you are. Yeah? And so if you're going to, in alignment with source, then how you see things is how they actually are. So at that stage, there's no gap between how things are and how you see them. They're collapsed onto each other. Yeah. Joy, you got to... Sorry?
Let me adjust your mic.
Good.
Okay, speaking of your newsletter, I read it on Friday night.
Oh, okay.
And I realized that I was not enlightened.
Okay. When you know you're not enlightened, you're enlightened, Joy.
I had this dream.
Okay, brilliant.
And there was this critter who was going up the wall toward this light.
Okay.
And I panicked because I didn't know where he was going. And all of a sudden I decided, I can handle this.
Good for you.
And this was in my dream.
Yes.
I got this paper towel.
Okay.
He must have known that I was coming to destroy him because he curled up.
Okay.
And I took the paper towel and I guess I killed him. I know I covered him with the paper towel, but then that part of what happened after the dream left. So I don't know whether I killed him, whether I threw him out, or what happened to him. But I thought this was, I didn't get the purpose of the, because I said, I hope this isn't Sean I'm throwing in the trash. But I did read your newsletter.
Okay, lovely. So can I make a response to it, Joy? I remember at one of the retreats you shared an incident a little bit like this as well. At one of the retreats up in Bishop's Ranch, you shared an incident which was a little bit similar to this. Now, if you take that, that dream for a few minutes, there's lots of different ways of interpreting that dream, obviously. And you're the best interpreter of the dream. But if this were my dream, what are some of the responses I might have to it? The first one might be, do I have a fear of insects? Is it just picking up on the fact that, I hate creepy crawlies, and so just picking up on stuff that's true for my real life? Or is it an invitation to somehow realize that everything that exists has a purpose? It came into being through some kind of a loving act of God, and therefore maybe I need just to repatriate it. Maybe I need to take the piece of paper, very carefully, and then escort it outside and release it outside. Is that the invitation? Or is there another level? Is it an invitation that that represents my journey, however halting it is and however slow it is, toward Christ consciousness, and that I should be, encouraging it, I should be celebrating it, I should be seeing it as an inspiration, that this little creature, no matter how small it is, in what perspective, it just keeps trying and trying and trying and trying and trying. I mean, I'm always amazed when I see little creepy crawlies in the wood. And they're there by their tens of thousands. And I often ask myself the question, where are you going? Do you have any idea where you're going? And are you going to go home in the evening? When it's sunset, are you going to kind of reverse your tracks? Is there a home? Are you totally nomadic? Do you have any purpose in what you're doing? Do you have any clue what's happening? Or do you have an astral body also? Is there like an astral body that's floating away above you that is acting like a GPS system? That has a big, high perspective, because I calculated one time, some of these little creepy crawlies, what I look at as a twig, when it encounters a twig, this is a high-rise building. So how does it, navigate around a high-rise building? When it comes across a log fallen, that's like Mount Everest. What's it going to do with Mount Everest? So is there some level of this creature where it has a GPS system, or an astral body, or some kind of psychic abilities, so that it's navigating not just through trial and error, but that there's some kind of guiding principle? And if so, is that a metaphor for my journey into enlightenment? That however slowly I'm going, and however pathetic my efforts may be, that in actual fact, I'm making progress. Wherever I'm going, I'm moving towards God. So it could be speaking to you at any or all of these levels. Yeah. Thanks, Joy. Thank you. Al.
Martin Luther King's famous "I Have a Dream" speech is always interpreted as a cry for civil rights. Could he have had another higher level of reality or unreality in mind as well?
Totally. Yeah, great question. One of the beauties of dreams, that dreams speak at many, many levels simultaneously. And so Martin Luther's famous dream, I had a dream last night. And, as you say, is this about a dream for civil rights in America? Of course it is. Is it about something much bigger than that? Of course it is. One of the things I hadn't realized about Martin Luther King until I kind of listened to a whole bunch of tapes a few years ago was that Martin Luther King was as actively and as concerned about the world as he was about African Americans in our country. He was as concerned about civil rights in India as he was concerned about civil rights in Alabama. So this is a man who was a powerful visionary. He didn't just have a vision for a subclass of American badly treated citizens. He had a vision for the whole globe and the citizens of the globe. Moreover, he had an ecological consciousness of which I wasn't aware of also. So I think that Martin Luther King in this dream, consciously or unconsciously, was talking literally about Christ consciousness, about a movement into a time when all beings realize their divine nature. That I was holding that level of the dream along with the more practical notion of getting voting rights for disenfranchised American citizens. So dreams will be speaking at many of these levels. And that's the beauty of the Gospels, that why you can read a Gospel, and there's a literal meaning to it, there's a symbolic meaning to it, and there's a mystical meaning to it. There's a mystical meaning to the Christian scriptures, which are pan-Christian, which you'll find in the Bhagavad Gita, or the Pitakas of Buddhism, or the Tao Te Ching. So when you learn how to read the Gospels at that level, you're united with all the scriptural traditions and all the wisdom traditions, the folklore of Native American Indian peoples, or the Proverbs of Ireland, or the folk tales of Africa. They're all scripture as far as I'm concerned. They're all speaking the Word of God when we have the mindset to be able to see to that level. Yeah. Karen, and then Rita.
I think I understand that this is a different sort of question. You've spoken in the past about the consciousness of mind as a higher level of consciousness than the heart. And there's some of the Gospel of Mary where she asks Jesus, how did I see you? Did I see you with my soul? Did I see you with my spirit? And he says, you saw me with your mind. So can you talk about that a little bit? Okay. What that is?
Okay. Yeah. Did you all hear the question? Yeah. The difficulty is that people use terminology in very, very different fashions, and this happens in every trade, in every discipline. Happens even in psychology. When you look at, for instance, the notion of the self in psychology, Jung's treatment of the self, the idea of the self is very different from Freud's, is very different from Adler's. So people will take the same term and use it very, very, very differently. So when you look at the terms like heart and mind and spirit, you have to figure out in what sense is the writer using a particular phrase. So much of the Gnostic scriptures has a kind of a Platonic feel to it. Plato, influenced by Plato. In fact, at the Nag Hammadi scrolls, the 13 books that were found at Nag Hammadi, one of them was a translation into Coptic of Plato's ideal republic. Yeah? So Gnosticism was fairly significantly impacted by Platonic thinking, Plato's thinking. So how Plato will use mind and heart is very different how we normally think mind and heart and spirit. So you have to try to figure out first, when you're reading a particular author, in what sense are they using this word? What does mind mean for Plato? Or what does psyche or soul mean for Plato? And very often, they're the reverse of what they think they might be. Or you have to go into a particular culture and find out when they use the word heart, what does heart mean for them? So we think in the West that heart means emotions. In Jewish theology, the heart was the seat of the soul. So in other traditions, the heart is the place at which we think. And so, for instance, in Hinduism, when you look at the 7 bodies in Hinduism, and the 7 chakras. So there's the base chakra, which is about physical survival, and then there's the second chakra, the genitals, which is about energy, and then there's the one at the hara, which is about personal power, and then there's the one here, which is about the heart space. But the heart is the mind. When you're in the Hindu model, you go from physical body to etheric body, to astral body, to mind body, and the mind body is here, it's at the heart. So in the Hindu system, the heart represents the thinking faculty. It's a different kind of thinking. It's a deep intuitive kind of thinking. It's not the rationalization that we associate with the brain in the West. So when you look at any of these texts, you have to ask yourself the question immediately: what culture is it coming out of? And therefore, how are they understanding the use of this term? And then when you look at a particular author within a culture, what cross-fertilization has happened, between cultures, and therefore in what sense is this author using this term? So in this gospel, when Mary asks him, how do we have visions? Are the visions at the level of the soul, or the level of spirit, or the level of mind? We would think in the West that the mind is just the ability to reason. In Plato, that's very different. So when Christ says to Mary, visions don't happen in the spirit, and they don't happen in the soul, they happen in the mind. And that seems totally counterintuitive to us in the West. But she's using the word mind very, very differently. Yeah. So Plato, for instance, had the notion that there's a oneness from which all comes, everything emanates, and from this emanates psyche, and then from psyche emanates soul. So it's a very different order of emanation. Yeah, so you have to ask yourself the question, in what sense are they using this word? So if I were to take the text of Mary herself, then when Mary says that visions are happening in the mind, I do not believe that she's saying, or that Christ is saying, visions are happening at the level of ratiocination or cognition. She's not saying that. She's talking about Sri, I don't know if you've come across the works of Sri Aurobindo, who was a great Hindu mystic at the 1900s. He had different levels of mind. He called supermind and metamind. So it's mind in that sense. It's mind which is much closer to source than soul is. So it's a place in between soul and source. Yeah. So the visions are coming at that level. They're not coming just from cognition or ratiocination. Yeah. So Rita and then Tom.
Well, a long time ago I had my question clear, but since then it's gotten quite confused. So I'm not quite sure. When you talked about Jung's 4 different levels, that's where I got a little bit confused. My original question was about deciding whether to dream up or down. If down is to our conscious body and our mission, and in different times in life we need help with that, can we, and I guess maybe logically, how do we decide whether we want to go up or down? Okay. Is down always dreaming wrong?
No.
Or not wrong, or, it's not helpful?
Yeah, that's a great question, Rachel. And it's not wrong, because we have to do both up and down. We're beings who are committed to incarnation. And therefore, on a regular basis, on a daily basis, in fact, we're committed to re-engaging with our mission body. That's the purpose we're here. So it's not wrong at all to kind of dream down. That's the very reason why we've chosen incarnation. As I said, the distinction is between dreaming down and dumbing down. When I dumb down, I identify with this physical spacesuit, and I think that is who I am, and that I'm basically born to be a consumer of goods and ideas, of my culture. So as long as I'm dreaming down rather than dumbing down, I'm fulfilling my mission. But in order to kind of supply energy for the mission body, I have to reconnect regularly with the cosmic body. And so I'm doing that at night time anyhow. When you go into deep dreamless sleep, you're literally connecting with Source. Every single one of us is totally connected to Source every day when we go into the deep dreamless sleep. Now the question is, can I do that even when I'm in my mission body? Can I have access to my cosmic identity? And if I can do that, then mystical revelation will flow through us as we do that. And we will be empowered for the mission, and we won't be overthrown or kind of disheartened by the vicissitude of the physical body. And so it's really very important to have the supply lines open. But most of us, they've been cut off. We've been told it doesn't exist, and we're physical beings. So learning how to dream up and dream down constantly, both ways, is important. Yeah. Tom, okay, sure.
Yeah, Sean, I think you may have partially answered the question, but I continually hear you and other people, and I see it, talking about children and how children really have a clear vision. Don't disagree with that at all, but I also know children, long before the culture can get a hold of them, if there's somebody next to them, a child the same age, who takes their toy, totally. All hell breaks loose. Totally. In fact, one could say that the purpose of the body is to make the child forget who they are. So yeah, I think children, certain aspects of children are very ideal, but I think there's something built into the system, which is not the culture's fault because it occurs much too early, that that warps us all away from remembering who we were when we came here.
Totally. You're absolutely right, Tom. Absolutely right. And so I don't want to kind of act as and say as if kids are infallible. They're not. But they have held on to something that the rest of us have lost. They've also developed characteristics like selfishness and narcissism, which is part of the journey. Now, I think that that's actually, that's built into the purpose of incarnation. That the game of incarnation is a game whereby God creates more and more difficult versions of hide and go seek with herself. And so initially there is only God. Like a married couple who fall in love with each other and they totally feel they've never experienced this level of love anyplace else until they have a child together. And then something else takes over. So if the love is totally self-sufficient and they've never discovered any greater love than this, why would they want to introduce a third party into the equation? Because somehow there's something about producing that which is both me and not me at the same time. Because the child I give birth to is me in the sense it has my DNA material inside, but it is not me because it's a separate soul, equally eternal to me. And so God plays this game where in order to love even more than she loved herself, she wants to love that which appears to be other than herself. So she creates these levels of games where she pretends that there is that which is not her. And so the first level of the game is creating souls, individual souls. Now, and the purpose of the game is to find out, can an individual soul remember that it's God? And that's fairly easy. That was a very simple version of the game. So that's like a version of blind man's buff. Is that what you call it here? Blind man's buff? Is that what you call it? Where you put a blindfold on somebody and then they got to go around and try and find where others are hidden. But you know, even if your eyes are blinded, your hearing gets sharpened. I can hear somebody giggling over there, so I'm going to go over this way. Or I can hear a shuffle of feet, I go on and move that way. So the second version of the game is you wear a blind man's buff, you wear a blinder, and you earmuffs. So now you're not getting any auditory feedback anymore, so you're not hearing the shuffle of feet or you're not hearing anybody giggling. Now how are you going to find people? You can't see anything, you can't hear anything. So now you're going to say, okay, what else? What other ability do I have here? I got a real good nose. I can smell Kathleen's perfume, she must be over here someplace. Yeah? I can smell Sean's BO, he must be over here someplace. And so I'm going to use my nose now. And so as we shut down one system after the other, we're going to have to try to find, you know, where people are hidden using whatever is left to us. Now that's the game that God played. So the first level, the blinders, was souls. She created souls. We figured that out fairly easily. The next version of the game was that she created mind. And now mind is able to separate and think, you know, we're ontologically separate and discrete from each other. Can I remember in my mind that, you know, we are God stuff? That's much more difficult. The next one then was physical bodies. Well, I'm literally physically separate from Ron. He's there and I'm here. So it's very easy for me to think that we're separate beings. Can I remember at that stage that he is God and I am God and we're literally just two facets of the same underlying essence. So it becomes more and more difficult. So every little child then has to undergo that same trajectory. So ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny. That the journey of descent for the entire species into physicality, the little child is going to do also. And so the child will start off holding on to a lot of the realizations of Christ consciousness and source, but then built into the system is the gradual amnesia for that and the identification with mine, that's mine, no, that's mine, you know, with the selfishness. And that's part of the trajectory until the child gets to the nadir and then has to start from the nadir, moving back up again to the realizations of unity consciousness. So it's all part of the program. Yeah. Yeah. Kathleen.
Is this right?
Is it right?
Well, can you hear me? Okay.
Sing and we'll find out.
What?
Sing and we'll find out.
I don't have a song now. I'm thinking. You know, trying to keep what I was wanting to talk about. When I dream, when I go to sleep, sometimes I sleep, sometimes I think, and sometimes I go to sleep. But I usually never remember my dreams. It's not once in a great while. And I can't, there's no way of trying to do that for me. About 3 nights ago, I woke up with a start out of a place where I never knew I was. Okay. It was like a deep place coming up from an abyss type. A place that was fine. It was great. You know, it wasn't great. It wasn't anything. It was just unbelievably a long ways away. Okay. And I woke up to the sound of people out around the swimming pool that is my bedroom opens out, the window opens out onto that. And they were laughing, and like I immediately thought they were on drugs, not alcohol. It was a ridiculous type. Well, alcohol too does that. And then they suddenly stopped and left. And I immediately went back to sleep. It was like an unusual experience. And I keep thinking, what was that?
So do you think that you had actually come from dreaming consciousness into waking consciousness, had heard this encounter outside your window, and then went back to dream? Sorry. Do you think at this stage, when you think back on it, do you think that you had been dreaming, then you woke up, you heard this noise outside in physical reality, outside your bedroom, you know, made some kind of mental comment on it, and then went back into the dream? Or was this episode in between this meat and the sandwich between the two dreaming states, was that actually a part of the dream?
It was like they broke it. Okay. Because of their noise. Okay. They broke where I was. Okay. But then immediately, okay, when they left, okay, I went back. Okay. I was asleep again. So you're convinced at this stage that the noise thing was a real physical reality? Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay, that's right. Okay, sure. So what you're wondering about is how did you reconnect with the dream? So you take the meat out of the sandwich, and there you're back where you ended at one stage. You've re-engaged immediately. Is that what you're saying? Yeah, yeah. That happens in dream state. That you can sometimes go right back into in subsequent dreams of the night. You can go back into previous dreams of the night. You can reconnect, and it seems to me that they're important, particularly important kinds of experiences, because normally each. It's your fault. Take your glasses down. Take your glasses down. See, it stopped. Okay. Typically, we'll dream about 6 or 7 times in the course of a night. In an 8-hour sleep, we'll dream out 6 times. But we don't remember them, obviously, very, very often. But typically, each dream is a separate segment completely, and they may or may not be related. But sometimes, even after you've woken up, you know, and going back to sleep again, the dream can pick up on the same motif. If it's a fairly important experience, it wants you to kind of re-engage with. So this would appear to me to be an interesting invitation. So do you want to say what you think it meant to you? This experience of long, long journey? Nothing I could do about it.
Okay. Out of my control. And did you feel trapped in that, or do you feel liberated by that? Okay. Okay. So if you were to try to put an interpretation on it now, so you're engaged in some kind of a journey, you know, over which you have no control, and you're not feeling trapped by it or kind of forced by it. You just c'est la vie. That's the journey. So that's okay. Does that ring true in life for you, or at this stage of life, or at any stage of life? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Right. Okay. So let me just make one final comment on something you said at the very beginning, which was that you don't remember your dreams. There's a few very simple techniques to help develop the ability to remember dreams. And one of the simplest is just to keep a paper and pencil at the side of your bed. And if you wake up from a dream, without ever turning on the light, literally if you write down 2 or 3 key words or phrases, you'll remember the dream in the morning. You'll reconstruct the dream from these. If they're key phrases, you don't have to turn on the light and kind of wake yourself up and destroy your night's sleep by just recording a few words. Or failing that, if you wake up at any stage of the night with a feeling, an emotion, whether it's anxiety, joy, happiness, whatever it is, you can take it for granted that that feeling is a result of what you've just been dreaming. So you can use the feeling as the entry point to working with the dream. So without any imagery whatsoever, or without any storyline, if you take the feeling that you wake up with and you start interpreting that, that'll give you the message of the dream. Because the storyline of the dream is basically to deliver a message. It's not the story per se that's important, it's the message it's trying to deliver. And if the message, if you get that message from the emotion, then you don't need the storyline anymore. Yeah. Okay. Thank you, guys. So before we begin our offertory, let's, one final, I'll give one last question to Brigitte.
Karen asked the question about visions and where they come from. I'm reading a very long, detailed biography of my patron saint, Brigitte of Sweden. Excuse me. She had constant conversations with Christ, with very detailed instructions, what she should do, what she should tell the Pope, what she should tell her children. She had 8. And it seems there's a cluster of those kind of saints in the Middle Ages, but people still have visions, and they still speak to God, or God speaks to them, rather. I'd like your comment on that, because I'm confused.
Okay. The truth is that the mystical tradition is the essence of the Spirit's activity. And so mystical experiences will always bubble through, but they'll be suppressed constantly by dogma in an organization and religious belief systems. And so what you find very often is that, particularly at times of real repression, when the ecclesiastical system or the political system or the economic models or the cultural trance is being particularly oppressive, then you're getting a real bubbling up of mystical. So it's like you have to keep the mysticism, has to be kept alive. So people like Brigitte of Sweden, or Francis of Assisi, or Meister Eckhart, a lot of them will flourish at times when the church is being really, really oppressive. You take like Teresa of Avila and John of the Cross and Ignatius of Loyola. They all flourished during the Inquisition times in Spain. So the more you try to repress the spirit of the religious spirit, the more it's going to leak out in mystical experiences, visions and dreams, stuff like that. So it's not surprising that you get these extraordinary women, visionaries in the Dark Ages in Europe and in the times of the Inquisition in Europe. And obviously it still happens in our times. Yeah. So thank you, guys. So let's exchange with each other a sign of peace before we continue with the offertory of the Mass.